Well, this panel is all about the people who had to take all those little dots scattered all over those pages of the score and try to turn it into a living, breathing thing. And so the person in charge of all that is Michael Schell. And he is not 14. And the guy who is in charge of, the gal who is in charge of making sure nobody appeared naked, is not with us. She's in New York. She was here last night, but she's gone to New York today. And her name is Torchia, Melissa Torchia. But as he guided and helped and directed her in her choices, Michael can speak to that today. To give them a place into which they can be, Stephen Kemp has designed 50% of the last 20 operas we have produced. And he gets awards worldwide for his work, and we're so proud of him. And I've been begging him for about 6 years to please move here. But he likes New York. Some people are just twisted. And now that we have costumes and scenery, it's all in the dark until Pam Gray comes along and makes it not be in the dark. Now, you have good biographical information on all these people in your program, so I'm not going to go over that. But I'm going to tell you that Stephen Schell,
Okay.
Michael Schell,
It's all right.
is one of the most remarkable people I've ever worked with. Of course, I've only been doing this 35 years, so I haven't seen very many. But Michael is among the finest colleagues and the most talented. And last night when I was seated beside Mark Campbell, the librettist, and he suddenly sobbed aloud at something that Michael added that's not in the opera, I kind of felt like I was getting some agreement on my side. So I have enormous respect for all three of these people, clearly. Pam has lit, goodness, 20 shows with us, more than that.
More than that.
More than that. From the beginning, from the early years in the Montgomery, Pam Gray was in there lighting shows for Irene Dallas. So it's, yeah. And she lights everywhere. You'll see it in your program. But what's important is she comes back here and she overhangs every damn show. So that when this guy comes to her and says, "Could we have some light over there?" she says, "Uh-huh." Instead of, "No, I only have these instruments." She always knows that stage director is going to throw a left-hand curveball, and she's going to have to figure out how to light something somewhere. So she thinks of these contingencies in advance. They're not in the plan, but she's got them there in case somebody says, "Do that." I didn't understand that, Pam, when we were first working together.
Right.
When I was made the director of production, I always thought, why does Pam overhang everything? But there are real reasons. And in this show, we were really, really glad because it's just a huge show. All right. I think that we have to start with the guy who I asked to direct the opera. We'd only worked together once. We worked in The Italian Girl in Algiers. But his approach to the work was so thoughtful, so thorough. His handling of the artists in rehearsal was so kind and respectful. To find that in a stage director is almost, well, I was going to say rare. It's not common. And that he elicits ideas from singers. They are so grateful that somebody wonders what they think. They're the ones out there in front of the lights having to do it, right? And everybody's saying, "Well, why do you do that?" I want to hit people. Because the stage director told him to do that. The singer doesn't have a choice about that sort of thing. They have to do what they're told to do because guess what? They have to get into the light. And that's where the light is going to be. It's where the stage director decided it was going to be. So they've got to get over there to do it. They must do what they're told. Now, they have to bring a lot of other stuff, too. Don't think that that's all they get. But they have to do that. And in talking to this guy, working through just thoughts about art, just thoughts about civilization, thoughts about what goes on in the world, I felt like I was talking to my very young little brother. This is my other little brother. He is 23. So, and Pam is like my sister. We're a family of many years. And I think you will greatly admire their work. We weren't 10 minutes into the show last night before Mark Campbell grabbed my thigh and said, "This is great!" I mean, he's here on the edge of the earth. What he was expecting, my God, who knows what he was thinking he was going to have to see. Because we didn't rent a production. We built a production. Michael Schell, talk to me about Silent Night. When you got handed this project 2 years ago, I just asked these two to get together to please figure out a set, to please design it as if we were building it. And I paid them separately to do that, just design it as if we were building it, because I hadn't yet called Carol Frank Buck. There's a lady in this room who, Carol, I'm always wondering about this conversation. Carol is a close friend of Mr. Carlson, who wrote Anna Karenina. And we wanted to do the West Coast premiere. And Irene Dallas called up Carol Buck and asked her if she would fund it. And she said yes, and she did. Well, here we're coming up with a new work, but Miss Buck does not know Kevin Putz. And we've had a couple of conversations. We went to a concert together at the cathedral. We've done a few things together, and I thought, I can't afford to do this opera. It's just outside our reach. And I thought, I wonder if Carol Buck would consider helping. And I decided I was going to call her up. Well, and she took my call. But the week before I called Carol, I found out that my half-brother has leukemia. So I'm telling Carol the story of Silent Night, and I get to the place where Jonathan Dale is trying to bury his brother William, who was killed in no man's land and is out there in front of him. He sees him every day. And he's gone out there at great risk to his life, surely to be shot, to try to bury his brother. And I got to that point, and suddenly I couldn't talk. And Carol said, "For heaven's sakes, Larry, I will send you the money." So thank you, Carol Buck. But that moment of the opera, I still can't talk. So, Michael Schell, talk to us.
Okay, well, I guess, one, when you said you wanted to do Silent Night, I was ecstatic. I was just like, oh my gosh, and he wants to do a new production. I mean, although it came with the caveat that we may not do it, I was still very excited. It's the show had gotten so much popular press and rave reviews, and it had one very sort of one incarnation that traveled to various companies. Those who were co-producers, as well as I think one other company that wasn't a co-producer on the production. But it was exciting to get the chance to do it, and so we had to kind of it was kind of really quick. I mean, we had to come up with it really quick. So,
this is June of 2015.
Yeah.
It says all the way back when we initially started, and by August we were showing some prelim concepts.
Exactly, and so we had to I knew I had to do a crash course in World War I, because unfortunately I was not as well versed in it as I thought I was, and it was daunting, and also I was really kind of mad at my education that I didn't know as much about World War I as I did other wars, but nonetheless, did all of that kind of, very quick research, and then Stephen and I looked at, and Stephen will talk through the sort of the design process from his end after, we looked at pictures and research and all sorts of things and came up with a concept that to this day, I think, when you're doing something and you're trying to design it really quickly, and you may not do it for another year or so, that's a challenge because you have to think of all of the things that you could possibly want to do in that moment, or else you're going to design a show that you're gonna get to rehearsals and go, why the heck did I have it like that? I have no idea what I'm going to do with this. And that's bad news for everybody. And it's not a place I like to be. So what was great was that the design happened, and then, of course, we were able to do it because of your generosity and your willingness to stand by it and produce it.
Yeah, I was determined.
Then I had to get down to the brass tacks of things and figure out truly what I thought the story meant to me. What did I think? Not just what I thought the plot was or the plot points, but what I thought it was about that was personal to me. And I've said this to Larry. I thought about, is it anti-war? Is it pro-war? What is it? And then I realized it's not. It's neither of those things. It is about what it means to be a human being. Dr. Cornel West says, this is my favorite quote, asking this question: what does it mean to be a two-legged, featherless, linguistically conscious creature born between urine and feces that becomes the culinary delight of terrestrial worms one day?
Wow.
Exactly. And what I love about that is that it automatically, by acknowledging the physical and unfortunately the ultimate demise of our anatomy, it gets to the core of the question. What really defines us as human beings? And it's choices. It's the choices we make in our lives. It's what we believe in and how we act upon those beliefs or don't. How we behave with others. How we show respect or we don't. Or we choose to go to war or we don't. It's all of those things that shine light on what we personally think it means to be human. And that is rather timeless right now and timely. So getting to that point, it started to really, I started to see how these characters were all making these choices. And it wasn't about whether or not they were going to fight the next day after this truce, because they all did. They all had to. They were there to fight a war. But what's great about the show is that it gives us insight into the whole possibility of what various different people could have taken away from this experience, because some of them went on to be probably even more staunch, even more defiant, even more violent, and others started to question, why are we here? And that's the beauty of this piece, is that it does not preach this message. It allows you to experience it, and you see in each of these characters this change. And the change it shows itself in different ways for each of them. Some characters decide to leave their country, to abandon their country. And some, decide to fight even more. So that was the beginning of the process after we sort of went through the initial stages of trying to figure out a way of doing it that then Larry could come up with a budget for us to build it and see if we could actually do it. Then we start to really get down to the nitty-gritty of how the scenes were going to play. How are we going to get in and out of each of these scenes? Because as you will see, some of them are very quick, and you have to go in and out of them so quickly. Actually, Mark Campbell last night said to me, he said, the first director should have told me something. He should have said, no, you can't do that. You can't switch a scene after 1 minute. You can't go to an entirely different location. And I said to him, but that's the challenge. I mean, I love that kind of challenge. That's interesting and it's exciting. That's sort of where we began, or at least I began, and started answering those questions, and then working with each of the designers. And unfortunately, Pam came on to the project later. I usually like to include everybody in on the initial stuff because it's one of those things where we could have all these ideas, but then, and Pam will talk about this later, is that she's having to play catch up half the time because she comes in when it's all done and has to go, well, what the heck is this? And figure out how she is going to not only take what I think is important about the storytelling and how I see it in my mind, but also filter it through her own creativity and her own ideas about the situations and the story and what impacts her and how she sees it. And that's what's great about a collaboration. But unfortunately, she has to do it in much less time. So she'll talk about that. So
Why don't we start with some costume things?
Great.
Because
Yeah.
there aren't many choices with costumes here.
No.
Only 2 women's costumes. You have choices there. Everybody else is in a uniform.
Right. That was Melissa and I were talking about that, and I think the unique challenge for her and for me was in a show that has mostly men. Most of the men are just wearing uniforms. How do we define these people? How do we bring out these individual characteristics? Because each of the soldiers are different. What I love about our cast of chorus is that it's so diverse. It is certainly not. It is not a traditional look at what a Scottish army would be. It's not a traditional look at a German army. It is a very diverse picture of these people. And that I love that, because they're all actors and we can all play various types of roles. And I think that's what's really great about our cast. So how do we show that in their clothing, though? Because they're all wearing the same outfits. And Melissa, I'm going to read just a little bit of what she said to me. She said, within these different armies, there were elements, or there were moments to have where you could slightly alter certain things that they were wearing to highlight or to show the individuals. For example, each of the clothes that you see tomorrow night, now we do a thing called distressing, where you distress a costume to make it look like it's been lived in or dirty or what have you. Well, these guys have been at war. By the time you see these soldiers, they've been at war for 6 months. So, and in World War I, there was a lot of mud, a lot of water. I mean, it's dirty. So they need to look dirty. So each of the costumes is individually
hand painted.
Yeah, to be distressed, but in very specific ways. It's not like we just went through them and just said, okay, on every leg there'll be a smudge here and now a smudge here. She went and she figured out who was going to have armpit, see wet around their armpits or on their arms, who was going to have more mud on their legs or near the bottoms of their pants. I mean, to that detail, she really wanted to show the individuality through that, which I found really remarkable and really pays off. In addition, we also played with the color palette with the various principals. So because they are also wearing uniforms, so with just lightening or brightening of certain colors, it would help them to stand out, but to appear as a whole the same. The women's costumes, as Larry said, were really the places where she got to be the most, I guess you could say, outwardly creative to you because they will look like uniforms, but then you see these women, and one of them is in a nightgown in the beginning, and she's only in the beginning, and that's it. And then the other is the opera singer Anna, and she appears in this, what we really wanted to seem like this angelic, white, gorgeous dress, and this robe that she has to go over it, because she does not know she's going to the front that night, and she ends up going to the front. And I don't want to give too much of the story away, but that's a little bit of what Melissa was thinking, that we wanted these women to be something pure, beautiful, not pure like as in, oh, they always do good, because Anna is a strong woman, and she makes a lot of strong choices in this opera. And actually, she is the one who leads Sprink, they're lovers. They're not married yet, and that's also very scandalous at the time. But she leads him to their final decision of what they're going to do. So she's very strong. So don't misread when I say pure that she's some sort of, sitting there waiting for her man to come to her. No, but a purity and a beauty that we would see why they would be wanting to be with these people and holding on to that memory, something that would be so vivid that they would hold on to that memory during war. So that's a little bit. We could show, I guess, some of the renderings here. That is Anna in the outfit that she ends up performing this concert, and then she goes to the front. The next one probably yes, and that's the cape that she has, and it's much more ornate now. It has a little bit more of a design on it. It's not as solid, or it's really quite beautiful.
It's an elaborately cut velvet.
Yeah. And then this is one of our Scots. I think this is Lieutenant Gordon. And that's that's Lieutenant Gordon. And then Father Palmer, he's a priest in the beginning, and then he goes to another uniform. Priests were often medics, and used as medics and stretcher bearers. And then this is Lieutenant Audebert, and there are the French red pants, yes. The French, actually, the uniforms were red pants, and unfortunately, they learned the hard way that the red pants were not a good idea in battle. They were easily seen. But what's wonderful for us is that it's still in this time where they would have been wearing the red. And then this is Lieutenant Horstmeyer, the German lieutenant. That is William, the young Scot boy who follows his brother to war, and this is him in his uniform. Or no, sorry, that was Jonathan, and Jonathan in his uniform. This is the Crown Prince, whom we see just a few times in the opera. Right, this must be General Audebert. This is Audebert's father. That may be William, I think. That is William. And that's Madeleine. This is the first female that the second female that we see in the opera. We see them both in the prologue. Madeleine is Audebert's wife. She is pregnant. And one of the things that was most important to me was that it's such a brief scene. You see these two together, and for the most part, she's yelling at him, saying, "Why are you going? I hate you." I mean, this is what she's saying, and then he says, "No, I love you." And he is under the impression that the war is only going to last till Christmas. It's going to be a month at most. He says, "I'll be back in time to see you and our baby be born." And so it was really important for me that she's strong, but she's also in a vulnerable place, and that we see that they love each other. Because this is it. We only see them at this point, and the rest of the time is Audebert talking about her or trying to remember her in his mind. This must be Ponchel. Yes. And that is Sprink in his tuxedo. He goes back from the front to perform a concert. Anna has arranged for them to sing a concert for the Crown Prince. She has done many things to make this happen in order to see him again. And and then there's Sprink in his uniform. That is William. That's William, yes, in his uniform. And William, we did not give anything away. William dies within the first 5 minutes, so it's not a big spoiler. So, right, okay, now we're getting into research of the army, the uniforms, and also these were actual sort of recruitment pamphlets. And we have one of them, we use a copy of one of them in the show. Oh, and now we're getting into more Steven stuff. So that's sort of the costume renderings, and also a little bit about what we talked about. And certainly we went through each character and talked about what they want, what I thought they wanted, what they were looking for. But like I said, individuality in an army is very difficult when you are wearing a uniform. So it really came down to ultimately the performances. And I knew that was going to be the biggest thing for us, is that these performances had to be authentic, and they had to know why they were doing what they were doing, the choices that they make to shake a hand, to not shake a hand, to do all sorts of things. We're going to, because the scenes are so short, give us so much information that was so necessary. So,
Stephen.
Yeah.
We're moving on to Stephen.
All right. So I'll just take you through some of the initial research that we immersed ourselves in. I mean, we really wanted to just look at all facets of the war, really study the trench life, and try to bring that horror as much as possible to this world, to fill the environment with what these men are living with in this terrible time and in these spaces. And try and convey a little bit of that as an audience member, trying to get you to really feel and live a part with them.
Exactly.
And so to contrast that, as we're looking at what the battlefields looked like before the war. I mean, you're looking at beautiful, beautiful spaces in France and Belgium, and Ypres in particular, which is kind of where the epicenter of this battle is taking place. You see in the upper left corner, we actually end up using this as a projection that you'll see in the piece, that we bleed from this into our actual war zone. So that's the effect, right? Because very shortly, the shelling, you end up with a landscape like this.
It's astonishing what artillery does to forests.
Yeah,
It just obliterates them.
Yeah, it's just so shocking. They still find hundreds of shells, unexploded shells, in each year. So just looking at the different documentation of different battles throughout the war, and you see just the horrible conditions, the mud, just what the earth turned into so quickly. There's several components talking about there's a church that's mentioned. So we were just looking at all aspects of what these spaces, like the reality of these things, so that then we can take them and figure out how to place them into our stage and make it work with the storytelling of the piece. So this is just the root of everything. This was the very beginning research. But then studying, just the different identities, just as we did with the costumes, but what do the different trenches look like for each army? What were the specific things that each army was doing differently that we could represent on stage to showcase, the different strategies, the different techniques, and the way they all stand out from each other. Unfortunately, the British, the Germans had been planning this for quite some time, and they were very on the ball with their techniques and had everything kind of a little bit more regimented. The British and the Scottish were kind of a little lacking behind, so we showcased that a lot. They were always notoriously the ones with more rat-infested trenches. And
Which is the German?
We're looking at, we pulled some of this into the German world, some of the corrugated tin. They frequently used concrete. And this point of the war, they're moving so frequently, and we actually hadn't gotten bogged down as much into getting all of that concrete in place. But we still try and showcase a little bit more of the fact that they had a little bit more time to get their defenses set up. There's an amazing amount of color photography actually from the war as well, and so just looking at all of this, it's just so fascinating as a turning point, and just the industrialization obviously that was introduced in this war, and so many things that were developed from it really led us in our design, because you'll see as we progress further and further.
That was a big thing that you had talked to me about, was how this changed, how warfare changed during this time. And that was one of the things I think that led us to what we have.
Right.
In a way, a combination of the trench life and
Exactly.
sort of a metaphor for this.
This is an American artist that was on the front lines drawing in the trenches, and there's so much documentation from not only pictures but this as well that gets so expressive as well, and seeing some of the somber tones here. And then we looked at art of the time that was being so inspired by the events as well, particularly Vorticism, which was an exact movement coming from Cubism, directly related to the war, propaganda into the war, and even used for camouflage on some of the naval ships. Eventually, was one of its most famous uses. But the aggressive shapes that we're seeing in all of this, we really use to kind of distill our world and kind of give a sense of the world as a whole. As a container to this battle, this destruction that's happening within it. So we wanted a contrast of structure against destruction, and that the organic quality of the nature being destroyed. We looked at all manners of different configurations, and initially we were thinking, could we do this with a more permanence, so that you really see all the armies at the same time there the whole time, just really moored in this horror. And we sort of landed on, we wanted to, it's in the music, the fluidity of all of this, and just being able to feature each of the moments a little better. We wanted to add more movement into it. So then we were looking at different ways of doing that. And one way was, and speaking to that sort of structure I was just talking about, the industrialization, the concrete forms, looking at some way, what's the way to contrast nature the most? I mean, just this rectangle, right? Yeah. This idea of something that's very unnatural. And so this is where we eventually landed. We came back to this, but one other idea we explored was this very aggressive knife idea, and an idea of, are we pulling apart and coming together with different spaces? But we landed and that also, like the idea of a seesaw, right? Like the idea of you're losing ground so frequently, fighting back and forth over a mile of ground. It all conceptually could have been a concept that we went with. But we landed with the idea of the more concrete structural forms, and let's just get straight into. You'll see, this is that moment I'm speaking about with Eep bleeding, and these are all the renderings. This was the pre-production that we did that August in 2015. And so you see stepping through this battle sequence. And just to touch on this, very early on, we kind of worked from the battle backwards to some degree.
Yes.
We really wanted to solve that. There's a very long sequence at the very top of the show that, is inescapable. You really have to address how to set the tone for the rest of the evening. Right. And listening to it over and over, we had this idea of how do we just get this in the faces of the audience? Yeah. And so we have these two units that the curtain comes up and we see all armies lining the stage push these units down into our face as the battle begins. And so then it's sort of unorthodox, but now for the rest of the show, we actually kind of have like a reverse stage, as some would think. Yeah. A lot of times you'd create a level up stage, but what we wanted was a physical barrier where you as the audience are looking through the dead trees, you're looking through the desolation to some degree the entire night. So it's immediately immersing you this whole time. So you see how that is featured here, and we kind of pick it out with light throughout the piece. But now you start to see what the set really ended up becoming, and you see this overall structure that was meant to represent the nations themselves, and then relating to that, each army has this machine of war, and we wanted to create a space that highlights the fact that all these countries are so similar. They're right next to each other. All of these people are so similar. And that's highlighted in the music and the storytelling, the libretto, of just that they have so many things in common. Mm-hmm. Some don't even know it. They find this out, but others know it the whole time. Yeah. And but just sort of featuring that we all, as humans, are also similar. And but introducing into that this very real, the levels of detail of each trench and each country's reality of these siege engines of war is kind of what we created.
And you realize if these people were going to be in trenches below stage level, all you would see is their heads, right? You get that. So they have to be raised up onto the stage so you can see what it is.
And there's a couple moments inserted in, like the visit to the Kronprinz's chalet, that we thought was great to feature. Like, let's not make the battlefield go away. That's the point. It's still happening. It's still ongoing. And that's what's pulling at Sprink, that his comrades are there on the front, and he's promised to sing to them that night.
Right.
And he's a huge morale boost to his company, and he must get back. So it's just, we're layering into the world's destruction here. Just going to keep going through and show you just a little bit more. We need any others?
Yeah, I think, one of Stephen, I just am going to make a comment about working with Stephen, is that the renderings that he is showing you, and then he also showed me renderings that would give me a vantage point from up in the balcony, and then also from the extreme sides. It's like working with him, it basically gives me all the information that I would ever possibly want, because I've worked with many really good set designers who do not have the facility that he does with graphic, with the work that he's able to do on the computer, that helps me as the director start imagining, okay, if that person buys that, yes, I'm sorry, they did buy that ticket all the way at the end on the on right. I wish they hadn't, but what are they going to see? And that's really, that's important. So
what you were seeing was all 3D renderings, which we did very early on, and then we built a physical model.
Yeah,
And afterwards.
These things look like photographs. They are not.
No.
And so this is kind of what Michael was talking about, because this is a fly-through animation that just shows some extreme sight lines that show you study. So now we're up in the mez, and we're looking at what someone all the way up in the mez. And this is great, because instead of having to render out a million different images to send to Michael, I can send him this, and then he can scrub through it at any length and go back and see just exactly how that's all looking.
Yep.
Do you see why he's done 10 of the 20?
And not only that, some of you have already seen this, but initially one of the things we put together a sizzle reel to kind of sell like what the potential, because that was all what the initial study was about, was like how can we create potential for us, and we can go back and figure out details. But this actually even. So frequently I'll time things to music. This is more of a best of sequence, but a lot of times we'll do a full transition. But this shows the prologue sequence as we get into the battle. It just gives a couple highlights of just what it could be. So now we're seeing it from another angle. We're seeing Jonathan with William there. And so the initial concept was this kind of piston movement to echo the idea of artillery, and we end up, we evolved the movement quite a bit, and they move all over the stage in many different configurations. And you see like how essential those elements, those are the building blocks of this show, and we actually were able to complete them before rehearsal started, so that they were available to us the entire rehearsal process, which became so key to the development, and really allowed us to explore even more than what we had even planned for.
Mm-hmm.
Shall we move to lighting? Because no matter how clever these young men are in creating scenery, you don't get to see it unless somebody puts light on it. And it changes a lot.
It changes a lot, yes. There's actually probably twice as much movement in this opera as there is in what I would think of as sort of the standard repertoire. It's very much, it has very strong elements, believe it or not, of musical theater in it, because of the way that the set moves and the speed of the scene changes, and sort of the fluidity of the movement on stage. So part of the difficulty, as Michael mentioned, is that I came into this a little bit later than everybody else did. And even though a lighting designer pretty much has to wait until the director and the costume designer and the scenic designer have sort of settled on an environment, usually you're involved in it so that you're there where all of the ideas are bouncing around, and I unfortunately missed that part. Actually, the information that Stephen put on into the Dropbox, which is, I'm sure you don't know if you're familiar with it, but it's basically an online storage space so that everybody can have access to the material at all time. And so I actually spent a great deal of time there looking at the work that had been done and the research materials, and that sort of helped me kind of get on the same page. One of the things that struck me almost immediately was how leached of color the environment was once the battles had started. There's nothing green, there's nothing really of any color. It's all dirty, it's all muddy. Much of it has been blown to bits. And so that informed my choice of how to support the color choices that the other designers had made. The other thing is that, as Michael had said, this is a very human opera. And so it's the humans who are important. So how then do we highlight the moments that you need to see where individual characters are making decisions that are going to affect their behavior for the rest, certainly of the opera and probably for the rest of their lives. So that in combination with the actual physical structure of the scenic pieces kind of led to the choices that were made. There's a lot, you'll notice, this is right at the beginning, and there was a concept picture that Stephen did of 5 soldiers standing in front of their various armies, and this is what it actually turned into.
Are we at photographs now? Yes,
Mm-hmm.
we're at photographs now. This
Yeah.
is an actual photograph from the stage.
Right.
Yeah.
So this is the battle.
You see how it looks just like the rendering? We have a good shop, don't we?
This is a particularly interesting scene, I think, for you
Right.
as well. There are 3 things happening that are important to highlight, and the way you chose the color for Audebert and the color for the guys, and then how do you make it so we can see the snow?
Right. And we actually had quite a lengthy discussion about the snow.
Yes.
It snows. We chose for it to snow twice in the opera, although in the libretto it does have one additional time, which we chose not to use. So this is towards the beginning of the opera when everybody's hunkered down in their various trenches, and snow has, to me, snow has this this ability to make everything clean again, right? Except that at this moment, it can't do that. And so one of the reasons that you only see the snow above the bunkers is because it cannot clean up the mess of what's going on below it on the ground. And so that's why the choice was made for this, as opposed to the end of the opera, where you see the snow all the way down to the ground and falling on the bunkers and ultimately covering over all the scars of war. So the like I mentioned before, the color choices were actually very important to me in this opera because so much of it is a contrast moment. So light and dark as opposed to color. So the color itself doesn't necessarily need to be there, and so I took it away. What is important are the particular actions of individual characters in the scenes, and so you'll notice that some characters are very definitely brighter than others because that's the focal point of the scene. That is the message that we want you to carry away from each individual scene.
That's a great picture.
Oh, that is a good picture.
Yeah.
One of the things that you'll notice when you actually see the opera is this is not realistic lighting. It was never intended to be realistic lighting. Okay, it is much more of a suggested realism and a guide for the audience rather than just, here, you need to see all of this.
Right. I think that's directly in line with the idea that we had with the bunkers was that we couldn't have the mud or the rats or the
Or the water.
or the water, but so it was suggesting the reality, but then really at some point it is a theatrical entity.
Yeah.
So how do we theatricalize it? How do we make it so that it's interesting for you to see on its own and for you not to think, oh, it's missing something. Because I think everyone on the design team has done a great job of making it a very insular world representing something that was actual, that happened.
I'm wondering if anybody out there might have a question. And I'm sorry that we're plunged into darkness, but it was more important, I think, for you to see these
That's
images
a great picture too.
than to look at us. We're ugly, and you've seen us anywhere. So, does anybody have a question? Right there.
I'm just curious, how long, when was it when it all came together?
So the question was, when did it all come together?
We have two different, probably multiple pieces. You started 18 months ago. So
Yeah.
when would you kind of say it's gel?
When was the final design due?
This last August was when we turned in the final design, so construction started shortly thereafter.
Yeah. So we had to be good with what we had then. Had to be ready.
So, yeah, we were really finessing things
Yeah.
kind of up to that point.
Yep.
Once there comes a point when you have to build something.
Yeah. Yeah.
Was there another question? Yes, in the far, far back.
Yeah, I wondered, do you have the ability, it's two questions, but do you, Larry, have the ability to rent that set out?
Yes, as a matter of fact, and on Sunday in the morning, I'll be having breakfast with representatives of the Arizona Opera. The general director is here, and I presume that's why they want to meet with me. Because I know they've been talking to the technical staff during the course of construction.
And then one for the director, stage director. When you make these choices, do you consult other productions first? Just seeing what they do. Does that influence you at all?
So the question was, do other productions influence the decision-making of the stage director?
That's a very good question. I'm glad you asked that because I was listening to the panel before and there was one thing I wanted to say about the issues surrounding performing new works or presenting new works. And this is right in line with what you're wondering. For this, for myself, I try not to look at other productions when I've been assigned a project. It's one of those things. I have a very good memory, and if I have that memory of an image or something happened, it's going to be very difficult for me to forget it. And not that not that I may not come upon and find the same way of doing, there's only so many ways you're going to do when Tosca kills Scarpia. It's kind of in the score. It's there. So, it's one of those things where you just, I try to not look at other productions, and with this one in particular, I did not watch that PBS, broadcast. I did not watch that. And I'm glad I didn't. I saw like one or two little clips of it. I'm really glad I didn't because it allowed us freedom to do something different. And this is what I was going to say about new opera. I think Larry has said that, it seems like everyone is having such a great time working on the show, and it's really been a very positive, wonderful, nurturing artistic experience for everybody, I think. And that's something I strive for in my rehearsals, but the one thing that I had nothing to do with is I think that the singers come to it with a sense of freedom when they're doing a piece like this, because they don't have 10 recordings of Tebaldi singing Anna Sørensen, and not that that's not a great thing. And certainly we carry that with us when we go to see Tosca or Magic Flute or whatever it is, the famous singers singing those roles. And how can you not think of that when you're going to see a performance of an opera that you know so well? But what's great about this is that nobody had that. So we could go into it, everyone, go into it and go, well, what can it be? What is it really? What will make this good? What will make this interesting? As opposed to, well, Leontine Price sang that scene a little bit longer than you did. And that's the thing. And I mean, unfortunately, I wish we could bring all of that into all of our work as opera singers. And I think slowly we will, because if we could, I think there are a lot of really great, talented singers out there who do sometimes cave under the history of opera. I've seen it. I've seen a tenor in rehearsal soar, and then when it gets time for, no offense if the reviewers are still here, it gets time to go out and sing that performance, they're petrified that the reviewer is not going to say that they were as good as whomever sang it, when they heard it wherever it was. So it's that kind of thing I wish we could break away from. And I think what's great about new opera is that it helps us do that, artistically speaking. So that's a long way of saying I don't like to look at other, performances before I'm about to work on something. And I think it gives me a sense of freedom that I can make it, and I can find what the composer and the librettist were intending without doing that.
Are there questions? Yes.
I was wondering whether and of course perhaps it should wait for the librettist, but I was curious if there was a story or some type of other medium that did this story before that.
So the question is, was there source material? Did this story already exist? And it did, both
Yes.
in book and film form.
Yeah, the film Joyeux Noël is the more well-known part of this, but there is a book, and the film actually they took plot-wise, they took it and they're very close to it. That's what makes it challenging in the theater, is that it's very very much like a movie. But what they did, and I hope Mark will speak to this, is that what they were really able to do was not over-sentimentalize it. Because the film has a tendency to do that. It makes you feel like everybody came there to have this truce happen, as opposed to what it just happened. Each of these armies came to fight, and then this experience happened. So the opera does a really great job of keeping that from being too sentimental.
So we have time for one more.
Does the lighting design include your projections, or how does that work together?
The projection.
I should say, does the lighting design include the projections?
The projection actually was a combination of Stephen and Nick Kamamoto. Stephen created the images, and then Nick basically set up the system so that it would do what Stephen needed it to do. As a lighting designer, I have to understand what it is that they're doing, because they have to mesh, okay? So the the projections can't overpower the lighting, and the lighting can't overpower the projections. So it's really kind of a balancing act. So there's a lot of information that we end up sharing so that we know kind of what the other is doing, so we've got a good starting point.
And the real truth of that is only known in the theater when you see everything running at once.
Sure.
And then we had the added problem of what we call sound cues. There are a lot of noises, bombs, guns, all those kinds of things that we can't do in the theater. And so that's all electronic. And it all has to time out so that the images, the explosions, the light, the sounds, and the orchestra are all moving in sync together. And on Saturday a week ago, I was not optimistic. I think that we are at a place now that we should stop. I know that there's a little bit of a break planned, and I think that they're doing some scenery changing up here or something. And I've stayed out of the whole technical part of this. And so we'll see you back in a little bit, and maybe we can have those lights on for the next session.